What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and I want to talk about iRating for a bit, and hopefully answer the question of, does iRating matter? For the impatient, my conclusion is, not as much as you think, depending on your aim. In advance, I apologize. I will be busting out a spreadsheet later. This video is about some data I've gathered, and the analysis of that data and as such will likely be pretty boring even by my own low standards for entertainment. Interesting perhaps, but probably boring, so apologies in advance. So first off, let's start with, what does iRating actually do? It determines what split you end up if a race does indeed split. It places you into whatever division you end up in, which matters only for championship points. To make the Pro Championship series of the respective disciplines, you need to have a high iRating pretty much by default. It provides a form of progression tracking. Makes you look like a badass on the forums when displayed in your signature or casually dropped in your argumentative post that has nothing to do with anything relating to the topic at all. That's it. Those are the only things that iRating does that actually matters. Yes, it changes your car number, but your car number is entirely irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Grip hacks are not included with higher iRating. They are, however, included with membership to Club Finland. Besides the Pro Series, it doesn't determine what cars you can drive. It doesn't say if you're a good driver or a bad driver, nor does it say if you are safe or unsafe. Yes, things can be estimated based off of a driver's iRating. For example, one does not simply acquire a 5,000 plus iRating by being unable to keep the car on track and being incredibly slow, nor does one get wrecked into a 750 iRating while being a driving god. At the end of the day, these are simply estimates based off of iRating that are often incorrect and based off of how the system works. Simply put, you finish well, your iRating goes up, finish poorly, and it goes down, as we all know. I want to go ahead and break these things down though, and we'll come back to the splits after we touch on these other things first. Regarding divisions, are you actually going to run at least 8 weeks from the 12-week season in a specific series in an attempt to win a championship? Are you racing for a Division 8 championship that literally no one but you cares about, or are you realistically gunning for the overall series championship? Given how many people actually compete 8 out of the 12 weeks that are counted for a championship points for a season, I believe it is fair to say that most people do not need to worry about iRating from that front, as divisions and championships really don't matter to the vast majority of drivers in iRacing. Are you going to attempt to qualify for the Pro Series? Put bluntly, are you actually even any good? Making the Pro Series is no trivial task, and very, very few actually even have half of a hope of competing against the best drivers around. If you aren't attempting to make it or aren't even close to that level yet, does iRating really matter on that front? That brings up the progression tracking, as iRating is one of the most obvious ways to tell if you're doing better or worse. You gotta be doing something right if the iRating keeps going up, right? I won't try and deny that iRating does have a general use in this regard. However, I will say from my personal experience, I've driven good races and bad races. I've driven poor races and somehow managed to finish well and gain iRating. I've driven good races, finished poorly, and managed to lose iRating. I imagine everyone out there has done the exact same. In the end, what really determines progression is how you measure it. Is it by a number such as iRating, or by knowing how you did in that race? Is progression measured over one race or over 1 year? While I'd say that yes, iRating should probably figure into your own driver progression within iRacing, it's hardly the only thing you can use to measure if you are improving. After all, if you run good races by your own personal standards, there is a very good chance that you will start to gain iRating even if that isn't your own progression standard. The two are related, it's just a matter of which one you're putting the focus on. Now, of course, everyone will have different answers to these questions. Some people will have no hopes of making the Pro Series. Some people will be right on the cusp and have a legitimate shot. Some people don't care about championships. Some people, that's the only thing that they care about. Some people, the iRating is going to matter because that's their progression standard. Some people, it's not. But there is one undeniable truth, and that is, as for being a forum badass, post count and cat gifts beat iRating, and we all know it. So that brings us to the thing that I strongly believe most people care about iRating for, and that is making the higher splits. I may be wrong here, but I believe making the higher splits, or staying in the top split, is a good portion of why people care about their iRatings, partly because from the start we are all told that the higher splits are better, the bottom split is always carnage, and this starts basically right from the start. Or in other words, you gotta run away from the rookie MX-5s as fast as possible. So that leads me to the question of, well, what iRating does it take to make the top split? So here is some data I've gathered over the last couple of days, and yes, it's spreadsheet time. I went through every non-team pavement series results sheet for the first 4 weeks of season 4 2018, the current season, for both road and oval side. For the special series such as the Oval Road to Pro series, as well as the NASCAR iRacing series, I used the 4 most recent rounds as of the same time frame. I specifically looked for only the races that split and found the highest strength of field of those races that split through the week. This same approach was also applied to each individual car in the multi-class races. Looking at the results for that race, I found the highest car number in the field, calculated their iRating upon joining the race, and added it to the spreadsheet. I then went ahead and calculated the average minimum iRating of the lowest driver in the races that did split, and then I also had a column with a 15% addition on top of the lowest minimum, just as kind of like a general guideline of a buffer type of thing. If your iRating is higher than the one listed, you would have made the top split, the absolute top of the top split throughout the whole week. If no iRating is listed, no races split that week, and everyone would have made the top split regardless of their iRating. The iRating required to make the top split on the oval side varies greatly, a product of very high participation in many races splitting in some series and not so much in other series. On the road side, it was more, straightforward. Most of the non-GTE series on the road side of things will see drivers around 2700 iRating mark making the absolute top split reasonably often, with the GTE being almost the sole exception there. If you're wondering how I did this, I did it all manually by going in through the various series page and into the results. I would strongly recommend not doing this if you value your sanity. That said, I did learn a lot from this data hell that I put myself through in the attempt to answer this question, and I would like to guide you through some of the data a little bit more, as there are some data points I consider outliers, though nonetheless valid and interesting. The most notable outliers were consistently the smaller size grid races and lower participation series, which were more prone to strength of field being determined simply by who came to that week's race, perhaps likely just being down to a particular driver enjoying that car and track combination for whatever reason, or just having some extra free time. For example, in one of the modified series on the oval side of things, I found a week where a driver with 9300 iRating joined up several races, greatly skewing the data. In the instances like this where another relatively high strength of field split race was available for the series, I disregarded the data from that series in favor of the overall stronger split. If an alternative split wasn't available, I simply used the data that was there and that was available. The multi-class races on the road side were also very prone to a similar effect. Fields in the Production Car Challenge, Grand Touring Cup, IMSA Daytona Prototype, and Le Mans HPD classes were often fairly small in the races that did split, which led to a surprisingly quite high iRating being required to make the top split within that class, although that wasn't perhaps necessarily representative of the field as a whole that actually entered. It was just kind of one of those things where there was no bottom half of the field because it got split between two slots. Split between two slots, easy for me to say. In these instances, the vast majority of these types of cases were down to the series itself and can be explained. Production Car Challenge and Grand Touring Cup both trying to squeeze 3 cars into 3 different classes into one series that has relatively small grids. Daytona Prototypes and the IMSA series being paired with a very strong GTE class as well as strong GT3 participation. The HPD and the Le Mans series being out of date to the rest of the series, while at the same time being a car that has been around for a long while within iRacing that drivers have moved away from in the last few years. I would simply view these cases as being the absolute worst case scenario in terms of the highest of the strength of fields, rather than being a general indication of how strong the field is on a regular basis. There are some other things I'd like to mention as well. Strength of field and splits are not always hand in hand, contrary to popular belief. There were more than a few instances where a race had splits, even multiple splits, still had a lower strength of field than a race that didn't have any splits. As expected, this primarily happened in lower participation series, even with the grid sizes I would consider reasonably large for that particular series. I was also particularly struck by just how few road races actually split. While a fair chunk of the oval stuff would split multiple times per day, the majority of the road series were lucky to split multiple times per week, if more than once. In fact, besides the ever popular for all skill levels Rookie MX5 class, I would say really only the GTE class offers the same consistency of split races, and thus in theory likely more competitive races on a regular basis for all skill levels. It also turns out that GT3 is no longer the thing it used to be, both in terms of participation and strength of fields. I'd put this down to an upcoming shift to the Pro Series Endurance GT class becoming the GTE cars rather than the GT3 cars as is current. As for a few of the more oddball things I noticed on this graph, the IndyCar's Open Setup Series is counted as a road series and uses road iRating to determine splitting even on ovals. It runs a 50-50 mix road and oval, alternating throughout the season. Interestingly, a noticeably higher road iRating was required to join the top split on oval races rather than the road races, despite an overall similar level of participation. As for a few of the spikes, Week 3 of the Le Mans Series was at Spa, which brought noticeably higher participation and much stronger strength of fields. Similarly, the Formula Renault had a good Week 4, which was at Phillip Island in that series. The Lotus 49's highest strength of field this season took place at Talladega, of all places, interestingly enough. Definitely an oddball. Porsche Cup's 1,000 top split minimum iRating gain can be attributed to one factor and one factor alone: running the Nordschleife. It's also worth pointing out here that none of the oval series were a restrictor plate track during this time span in this data. As I sifted through this data at the start of Week 5, the NASCAR stuff is headed to Talladega for Talladega Week. The minimum iRating to make the top split has already proven to be considerably higher than in the standard non-restrictor plate weeks previous. But considering the increased participation those races see, as well as the nature of the racing at those tracks where everybody's super glued together regardless, and the fact that they come up only 6 or 7 times in official participation for each series as far as I'm aware, I'd consider it more of an outlier worth noting rather than a standard thing to influence the general data. And of course, it is pretty obvious to point out that most GTE races don't boast 4,000 plus iRating minimums to make the top split. Similarly, mini-series rarely split. For example, most Spec Racer Ford races don't split, though participation is fairly regular across the board. The data is simply the lowest iRating to make the highest split and can only tell that particular story. So there we go. Does iRating matter? My conclusion is, well, not as much as even I thought, depending on your aim. In my experience, what people really care about is being able to make the top split, as that will determine your championship's hopes, as well as the fact that it's far more fun running against the toughest competition around, which drives the improvement in many cases. In that sense, yes, I think to many drivers it probably should matter to a degree. Where this has changed my thought process, though, is for who it should matter. Drivers with 5,000 iRating on the roadside, not interested in racing the GTEs or the LMP1s or aiming to go pro, actually have surprisingly little use for all that iRating. It doesn't matter one bit. It's entirely irrelevant almost. Losing 2,000 iRating in that scenario would actually have surprisingly little effect in the grand scheme of things. Rather, I would say that iRating should probably be more important to the drivers who are just on the cusp of making the higher splits. In my personal opinion, it's always more fun to have to rightfully earn second to last place through a strong effort rather than just cakewalk the field against drivers who are not up to your own skill level. I think many people would agree on this, and I think it's for those guys who are in that sort of limbo that this is where it should probably matter a little bit more, just to firm them up in one position or the other, making the higher split or staying in the lower split if they prefer to do that. Or alternatively, do what you care, do what you do, wherever you end up, learn to stop worrying and learn to love the bomb. So that's just like my opinion, man. So what do you guys think? I'd love to hear from you guys as to this, and maybe it changed your mind seeing this data. You know, certainly it opened up my eyes seeing that really a 2,700 iRating on a roadside is literally pretty much all you need. But hey, who knows? Everybody's got different perspectives through their results. But I also say, while I rarely ask on these videos, given the amount of time and effort I put into this one, going through all the data, I would really appreciate it if you guys would leave a thumbs up on this video if you enjoyed it. Digging through all that data really did take way too much time, and I promise I'm not doing it again. Okay, maybe I'll do it again if I have to, but that was not my idea of fun. I'll put it that way. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.